Two from Galilee. A love story by Marjorie Holmes.
Today we continue with our readings from the book Two from Galilee. Yesterday we finished chapter 1, and yesterday we learned about Mary and some of her background. Mary's mother, Hannah, her father, Joachim, her sisters and brothers, and we also learned of Joseph. Mary at this time is 13 years old. Joseph is 19 years old. Unfortunately, Mary's mother, Hannah, does not very well approve of Joseph. She's looking for a type of a husband that is more rich, more cultured, maybe even a priest in the temple. Let's continue now as the drama unfolds on Two from Galilee.
Chapter 2.
The pink light was claiming the sky. The very breath of God was tinted as mist drifted down from the hills, across the fields, blurring groves and vineyards. Foliage sparkled with last night's storm, and petals gleamed in the streets. In all the little houses, people were stirring, and the singing that always signaled the beginning of a good day in Nazareth joined that of the birds. There was the smell of bread baking, and passing the big public oven dug near the well for the use of the poor, Mary could feel the heat of coals as the crone, Mehitabel, slapped her loaves upon them. "Mary!" the other girls carrying jugs or skins or leading livestock to drink to the trough cried out to her. And it was as she had expected. Her cousin Deborah, who missed nothing, pounced on her secret and made it news. Above the creak of rope and bucket, the slosh of water being poured into pitchers and jars, the mooing and the blatting of sheep and cattle. The ripple of it ran through the crowd. "Mary's a woman now!" Offering a mixture of congratulation, they made room for her nearer the head of the line. Old Mehitabel even joined them, her cackle splitting the bright fruit of the morning. "I say it's just the beginning of a woman's misery. A heavy price to pay, I say, because Mother Eve ate an apple. Now, if it had been a pomegranate or a melon..." The women laughed. They could see a joke. For wasn't it their entire existence that was based upon, if almost ludicrous, Eve's sin? Here were the Jews, God's chosen people, yet none had known such bitter hardships, and their land for generations had been occupied by heathens to whom they must pay tribute, but whom they would not deign to touch. There was something crudely cleansing about Mehitabel's audacity. Another voice spoke up. "But nobody's really a woman until she's lost her maidenhood. When that happens, let us know, Mary, then we'll all celebrate." Mary flushed. "You must be thick-skinned to be a Galilean woman. You must not mind these jokes." Modesty quarreled constantly with this brash discussion of the state they seemed to value above all else. The coming to bed with a man, the loving, the begetting. But how could she blame them when her own thoughts could dwell on little else as well? Cleophas, Abner, the others, but above all, Joseph. Adored as a child, dreamed of as she grew older, scarcely daring to hope. Her friend, yes, but perhaps her friend too long. One day she had summoned the courage to ask him, "Why haven't you ever been betrothed, Joseph?" "Can't you guess?" he smiled. "I'm waiting for you, little Mary." After that it was their secret, almost too precious to discuss, yet a baffling change had come over him those past few months. He avoided her. She never heard his voice except in the synagogue. Wherefore, she thought in mystified desolation. Why? Had she done something to offend him? Or was he bowing to Hannah's snubbing, too proud to beg for what he thought he could not win? Heartsick at the prospect, Mary swung the bucket over the worn stone lip of the well and drew it up. Or had he changed his mind? That prospect was staggering. Could it be that Joseph had at last found someone else? Hoisting the moist weight of her jug to her head, she fell into step with Deborah, who had shooed her little sister ahead so that they could talk as they climbed the hill. The child was plainly disgruntled, and although Mary did feel sorry for her, she was grateful. She was anxious to question Deborah, whose high white forehead and long, elegant nose seemed almost to sprout antennae, so alert was she to all the latest gossip. Deborah would have heard. But Deborah was also vastly filled with herself, and today she babbled of Aaron, her betrothed. He was just back from Magdala, and had brought her a cashmere shawl. And he's ordering a chest made for me of the finest camphor wood. Mary swallowed. Who's making it? Now, wouldn't you like to know? Who else but Joseph? Aaron wouldn't trust anybody else. She moved along with the grace of a mountain cat. Her cool, alert eyes toyed with Mary, seeking her reaction. Then she rushed back to Aaron, the stone house he was going to have ready in the fall. What an important lover he was getting to be. How she runs on, Mary thought, with a kind of pitying impatience. How she exaggerates. And she thought of Aaron, pudgy and slow-witted, despite his high good humor and his generosity. People loved and despised him vaguely, including Deborah herself. She said with a shade too much enthusiasm, "Aaron will make a splendid husband. You're lucky your parents chose such a good man for you. As for the chest," she blurted, "when is Joseph starting? You'll want to see how it's coming, won't you? Let's go together to the shop." "I knew I'd trap you." Deborah turned on her in triumph, if not sympathy. "Come now, Mary, you can't go hanging around after him when it's plain there'll never be anything between you." "Why is it so plain?" Mary demanded. Her whole body ached from the weight of the cold jug. "Do you mean you've heard something I should know?" She had almost a superstitious faith in the powers of her cousin. Better even to face the worst than to go on enduring this mystery. "If you mean, have I found out he's asked for someone else? Well, no," Deborah admitted flatly. "There was nothing to that talk about Leah. I got it straight from Aaron, who got it from Joseph's brother. Leah's father wanted the match, and frankly, Joseph's parents would have been relieved, but they yielded to his argument that he wasn't ready to marry. Not ready. At 21 and past." Again she darted a tantalizing glance at Mary. "Though if he takes after his father, he'll never be able to provide much for a wife, and he's never laid anything by for the marriage." Mary bridled. "He's been helping his family. The household is swarming with younger ones to be fed. How could he save anything?" "How you defend him! Well, I don't blame you," Deborah said disarmingly. "He's the most attractive youth in Nazareth, even comelier than Cleophas in some ways." She gave a dramatic sigh. "The way he moves, and that voice, those eyes. Or maybe it's because he's kept himself from women that makes him seem so appealing. Whereas Cleophas, he's like the Greeks." "Where there is money, there's always more temptation." "You can't put me off by defending Cleophas. It's plain you're mad for Joseph. But then so are a lot of girls. He'd have been married years ago, and the father of a large family if they'd have had their way. But you, Mary," Deborah regarded her cousin with wry resignation. No amount of maternal rivalry could alter her affection for Mary, or her own curious pride in her. "You're the only one he's ever had eyes for. If he's not to have you, I wouldn't be surprised if he never married." "But that would be a disgrace," Mary protested, "and a disappointment to his family." Deborah shifted her picture, here at the corner where their paths parted, and she continued to hold Mary with her look of open envy, speaking those tart truths too obvious to quarrel with. "Anyway, it's you who are far luckier than I am. It's a rare thing to be loved so steadfastly by such a man, whether you ever lie by his side in marriage or not." "Thank you, Deborah." A great love for her cousin surged up in Mary. "That is a generous thing for you to say. But why then is it so certain that this is not to be?" Deborah shrugged impatiently. "Don't be a stupid donkey. Aunt Hannah, of course. Don't you think she'll ever give you up to someone else like Joseph after all of her boasts about the grand matches you can make?" She turned, graceful and cat-like, and went her own way up the winding alley, while Mary stood hesitant, torn. Hannah would need the water. She ought to go straight home. But now more than before she was assailed by the high, desperate resolution at the well. The conversation with Deborah had only made it more imperative. She must see Joseph. Not now, of course. It was too early to discuss so grave a matter. But perhaps if she just walked by his house, brushed however lightly against the worn stone doorstep, her nerves would be fortified for that later encounter. Her hungering heart would be appeased. Turning swiftly as one driven, she headed for the short street where the carpenters plied their trade. Yet as she drew near, her blood began to race, and she regretted this rash compulsion that would only make her look brazen and foolish should any of his family be about. She wished desperately that she had veiled her face. Then, as she plunged hastily along, she heard her name. "Mary!" The voice rang out like a bell, and looking up, she saw him just above her on the incline of ground behind the half-cave of the house. He leaped the fence and came striding toward her, impossibly tall in his rough, dark, sleeveless tunic, his astonished face alight. "What are you doing here so early in the morning?" "As you can see, I'm on my way home from the well. I'm in a hurry, if you'll just let me pass." "But Mary—" I must know why Mary has taken this street of the Joiners if she's in such a hurry. Her usual route is much quicker. "Aren't the streets of Nazareth free for the choosing?" she said, mimicking his courtly tones, if not the smile behind them. "And isn't Joseph forgetting his manners to waylay a maiden like this and risk being seen talking to her on a public street?" She spoke sharply, to belie the terrible pounding in her breast. She had not planned it like this. She felt startled, stricken. But when he said her name again, softly, softly like a slow caress, something went very still within her, and she lifted her eyes to meet his. "You're right," she said. "My friend has guessed my motive, though it's not very gallant of him to force me to admit it. I came by his house because my heart was sore for a sight of it, since it has been so long since I've seen Joseph himself." "Mary," he said it again, his clear gray, shining eyes still fixed on hers. He reached out and took the jug from her shoulders and drew her into the shelter of a clump of almond trees. The ground was strewn with their white petals, and a few more coasted down. Mary watched him place the jar on the ground. It was tipsy, and she worried lest some of the water spill out. "Wherefore?" she demanded, beyond pride. Her hands, still damp and cold from clutching the vessel, were pressed tightly together. "Wherefore is it that you no longer find reason to come by my house, Joseph ben Jacob? Why do you always disappear after the services at the synagogue without a word to the family of Joachim?" He plucked a blossom from the tree, studied it a second, then handed it to her. "Surely the family of Joachim feels no loss, Mary." "I do." The words hung vibrant between them, yet it was as if the words were superfluous. What she said or did not say had little to do actually with the charged atmosphere between them. She rolled the blossom between her fingers, crushing it. "I miss you, Joseph. I miss you so much." He turned and gave the tree a violent shake, as if deliberately to withdraw from the spell in which they were both caught. His tone changed, too. "You're not a little girl anymore, Mary, that I should carve you dolls to play with or sit picking out the nut meats for your mouth." He began brushing the new cascade of petals from his shoulders. "You're not a child to be taken up into my arms and carried about anymore." "I wasn't a child then," she told him. "I was nearly 12. I have never forgotten. From that moment until this, I have never forgotten what it was like to be held in Joseph's arms." He drew a deep breath and dragged his gaze back to hers. And now in amazement, she saw his suffering. She remembered Deborah's words, congratulating her on Joseph's faithfulness, which, if it were not to be fulfilled, could only mean his grief. "Forgive me," she whispered. Believe me, the last thing on earth I want is to hurt you, Joseph." The muscles in his throat tightened. He said, "I know that, Mary. But if your courage in speaking to me as you have is painful, it's nothing compared to the joy your words have also given to me." "Then why?" she implored again. "Why do you avoid my house?" "I haven't slept, not in weeks," he said. "Truly?" she said. "That's a pity. But you haven't answered my question. Why is the sight of me and my people so distasteful to you that you turn from us as if we have some dreaded disease?" It's too early in the morning to be so cruel, Mary. You know very well why I'm trying to dwell on other things. The son of Jacob is not welcome in the house of Joachim." "Your lack of sleep must have affected your mind that you should think such a thing. Come tonight," she invited him before she could even consider. "Come to eat the evening meal with my father, so that I may prove how foolish your words are." He gasped, and so did she. But there was no retreat, and a radiance came into his lean brown face that was indeed ravaged from lack of sleep. He laughed. "Does your mother know of this?" "My father will inform her. He'll send one of the children down to confirm the invitation this afternoon, or he may even come himself." "You seem very sure of this." "My father loves me." "I'll count the hours then," he told her. The faint ironic twinkle had returned to his eye. "If you're sure I won't encounter any representatives of the family of Abner or Cleophas presenting their case for Mary's hand—" She started, but held her ground. "If Abner and Cleophas want me enough to goad their fathers into pleading their cause, then let Joseph, whose sleep is so strangely disturbed, he claims, let him want me enough to bestir his father to enter the picture before it's too late." She took up her jar and then fled. A vast astonishment lent wings to her feet as she flew up the cobbled steeps. It was as if she had been carried boldly over unthinkable crests and was now soaring to forbidden and joyous heights. She wanted to laugh, to shout, to join in the singing that now rang from the countless courtyards. "The heaven declares the glory of God, the firmament showeth his handiwork." Joseph, she thought, his handiwork, that strong, high forehead, those serious, shining, sea-gray eyes, that sensitive mouth. Her womanhood arose in her and flowed from her, not as something submissive and weak, but as a force, a release. Joseph was still her beloved. He had always been. And now the time was come when all things might be achieved, for she was a woman at last, truly a woman, and she would take things in her hands, however untried, and make it all come about. She was not even afraid of Hannah, who she knew would resist, of course, and make things difficult, but who would yield yet to her husband because she must. Not once did it occur, though, to Mary that Joachim might offer some resistance of his own. Her father stared at her from his rough red brows. His heavy face was troubled. "Here? This night? To break bread with us?" Mary nodded. Until now it had seemed so simple, even inevitable. Such had been the urgency of her desire. Several times during the morning she had been tempted to speak of it to her mother, for to her surprise Hannah had not been angry about the long time it had taken her to fetch the water, and there had been a precious harmony between them grinding the flour. A curious new feeling of unity as their hands moved in the familiar rhythms of the mill, pulling the handle back and forth. Before, the rasp of the stones had often seemed to her like the very air that hovered sometimes between her and Hannah. It was gritty. Yet this morning the millstones had made a kind of homely music as they ground the grain, and they smiled at each other through the little haze of dusk from their mutual task. And when Mary spilled the meal, rising too abruptly to dump the fine, soft cone into the bin, her mother had said only, "Don't worry, we can grind more. A woman's hands do tremble sometimes, and especially at this time of the month." "Oh, Mother, that is not the only reason my hands tremble. These hands touched those of Joseph this morning. He loves me, I know it, but he's too proud to humble himself before us. He fears your rejection. Oh, Mother, so bright and full of vigor, in so many ways so dear, don't give him cause to avoid and deny me any longer." But Hannah's very patience stayed Mary's words. Mary could not bear to spoil this rare mood that sifted so exquisitely through her reverie. And again, threading the loom, the smell of her mother's flesh bending over her as Mary's fingers fumbled for the strands, a dry, yet tingling scent of herbs and curds and vinegar that exuded from her wrinkled skin. This, together with the heat of her mother's quick breath, stirred her to an almost insupportable need to speak, to tell her in desperate tones, if necessary, how lately her whole being was like a parched field thirsting for a sight of Joseph. Surely you were young once, Mother. Surely you felt the heat of the blood, the terrible longing. You're vividly alive in every bone and sinew. You've mated and borne children. Though desire seemed preposterous between her parents, nonetheless her imagined argument rushed on. If ever you've loved anyone, love Joseph too. Make it known to my father that you won't oppose his taking me to be his wife. You are clumsy this morning, Hannah fretted, retrieving the dropped shuttle and deftly correcting the mismatched threads. But she brushed a rough little bird-claw hand over the bowed head. You'd better lie down a while. I'll put Salome on the weaving. Her kindness unnerved Mary. No, I feel all right. Only the love I feel for you and for others, it seems so very close to the surface today. I want to laugh and to cry over nothing. The spilled flour, the tangled threads. I want there to be harmony in all things. When two people grind the flour that makes the bread of life together, they should never be pulling against each other. The loom, the patterns interwoven on the loom. Puzzled, Hannah saw that Mary's eyes were luminous and wet. If only lives could themselves weave smoothly in and out, joining and strengthening each other instead of so often tangling and breaking apart. Her mother gave a short, uncomfortable laugh. Truly, I think you should lie down and rest, she said, and she turned to give a brisk, comical little kick to the loom. This old loom belonged to your father's mother. I'll never forget the miserable hours I struggled over it when I lived with them. Perhaps it would be well to be rid of it. Have some carpenter build us a new one. Then you and your sisters will have less cause to weep over tangled threads. Mary gazed at her, shaken with temptation. Some carpenter. And while they were at it... But no, wait. Take this matter up with her father. Then all would be well. And so ends our second reading from Two from Galilee. As you've heard, Mary is now trying to become brave enough to talk with her father about having Joseph over for supper that night. That may seem a little unusual to you because it doesn't seem like it would be any big deal because of a girl having a guy over for supper, but in those days it was quite unheard of, especially when her parents were looking for a rich young man for her to marry. Joseph was not a rich young man. His parents were not wealthy, and as you've seen, Mary's mother Hannah does not approve of him. Tomorrow we'll find out what Mary's father Joachim has to say about Joseph and his coming over for supper in part 3 of Two from Galilee.